Hello and welcome to CNBC-TV18. I'm Shireen Bhan. As India heads towards the centenary year of her independence, it is time for us to reflect on the milestones of the past and also chart out a roadmap for where we wish to be. The government has asked individual ministries to draw up an action plan for change with the emphasis on improving the ease of living, the ease of doing business, education, healthcare, climate action and more. While the government readies its plans, CNBC-TV18 in association with IIM Kozhikode has launched a leadership series to engage in a meaningful dialogue to map what the key drivers for our social and economic growth should be, to capture our aspirations as a nation and draw up a charter of change that will shape the idea of India at 2047. With close to 2 years of education lost, not only India but the entire world stares at a generational crisis, a learning poverty. As per India's latest National Achievement Survey, the average learning achievement across all grades and subjects dropped from 58% in 2017 to 54% in 2021. Having said that, students would have been worse off had it not been for technology, which brought classrooms to tablets and smartphones, enabling learning anywhere, anytime. But nearly 30 million children, mostly in rural India, do not have a digital device or access to e-learning. That's according to data presented by the Education Ministry in Parliament. While this year's budget took note of the new normal and made a slew of announcements to promote digital learning, the clamor for faster implementation of the new national education policy is also growing louder. The NEP adopted in 2020 seeks to reorient India's outmoded education systems to the requirements of the 21st century. The adoption of such an overarching multi-disciplinary approach will be crucial to tackle the complexities of the post-pandemic world. From rethinking curriculum and modernizing examination to ensuring a more equitable education system, a lot needs to be done. Higher education reform is in the need of the hour as the world goes all tech. Skilling, reskilling and upskilling will become vital if the industry has to find India's youth employable. Employability of India's graduates and postgraduates has only shifted gradually from 38% in 2016 to 46% in 2022. So what must India do? And if one can imagine the contours of India's education system leading up to 2047, 100 years since independence, what would it look like? Well, to envision it, joining me today, Urvashi Shani, the founder and CEO of Study Hall Educational Foundation. We also have with us Shaheen Mistry, the CEO and founding trustee of Teach for India, and Professor Debashish Chatterjee, the director of IIM Kozhikode. Urvashi, as I pointed out in the start of the program, there is a lot that is on the table that needs to be addressed. A long journey, a long distance has been covered, but a long journey needs to be covered up as well. So let's get started in a post-pandemic world, Urvashi. As we pointed out, it's not just India, but globally we are facing an issue of learning loss. But COVID perhaps is also an opportunity for us here in India and other parts of the world to reimagine classrooms of the future, to reimagine education for the future. Let's get started there on the lessons learned and, more importantly, on the charter of change.
Education policy, as you know, has been talking about a whole paradigm shift, a mindset shift on re-envisioning classrooms where they can't be same old, focus on content, rote learning, exam-driven. We're thinking for multi-disciplinary approach, more interactive, more use of technology, and 21st century skills, which are almost entirely focusing on processes, on learning processes, on analysis, on collaboration, on teamwork, on processing information, away from just content. Right? So as we think of classroom future, there needs a lot to be done. First of all, when you're thinking of a paradigm shift, you're thinking of a whole mindset shift. There's an army of teachers that needs to be retrained, which means unlearning, which is the hardest part, by the way, and relearning. Not just teachers, even school management, even school and your governments, the departments, they all need to start thinking differently. So committees are being formed, people are thinking about it. It's not going to be as easy as it seems because, you know, lessons that have been learned for so long and which in whatever broken down way was working. Very hard to unlearn them. People still can't see the writing on the wall. And so it's important to start really from the bottom and work with the teachers, involve communities, think of distributing learning spaces, think of distributed teaching, learning teams. And for that, we need everyone to be thinking differently. Governments, I mean, there's a policy. But again, as you know, that the devil is in the details of the implementation. So if we want that to happen, everyone needs to be on the same page across the board.
Yeah.
And that will take some doing. I'll stop there, Shireen, and get up.
Yes, absolutely. We will need all hands on deck, whether it's the government, it's schools, teachers, principals, the community, parents, and of course, students. Urvashi Shani talking about how the pandemic can be an inflection point for us to reimagine the future of education, reimagine the way we educate our children, reimagine our classroom. Shaheen, I want to understand from you. There is a problem, as Urvashi was saying, on the teacher side. In fact, you know, many people think we don't have enough teachers. That's actually not true. We have more than enough teachers. We don't have enough skilled teachers to be able to achieve the learning outcomes that we desire and we aspire for. Shaheen, let's address that piece first in terms of ensuring that there is supply of the right kind of educators that this country needs to ensure that we develop the skills for the future.
Yeah, thanks, Shireen. I mean, it's a topic very close to my heart, and for the last decade or so, we've been really trying to go out there saying across India that we need our best and our brightest and our most committed people to join teaching. And yet, as you said, that's a tough ask because teaching today is not aspirational. It is not as well paid as it needs to be. There are not enough opportunities for our teachers to learn and grow. I think we need to work at all levels to change that problem. We need to make teaching the most important thing for young people to do. We need to train our young teachers in a very, very different way, starting with really shifting the way they even think about the very purpose of education and expanding their definition of education. Kids should come to school thinking, I come to school to learn the skills and values to change the world. If that happens, and that is a teacher's job, you can see the significance and importance of the job. And I think whatever we can do to pay our teachers as well as possible, to value them as much as possible, to give them as much recognition, all of those pieces we need to work on and be committed to. But one last idea, Shireen, which is a little bit of a perhaps radical, disorienting idea, I think we need to change our very definition of a teacher. Today, we think that someone who is a B.Ed trained teacher needs to come into a classroom and teach. But what if we start thinking that all of us in the system, students and teachers, are both learners and teachers? If we can redefine that and say every one of us, you know, even if we're 6 years old, we have something to teach somebody and we have a lot to learn. Can we imagine our education system as a many-to-many ecosystem where we're all teaching and we're all learning? And will an idea like that perhaps unleash the volume of teaching that we actually need to get every child an excellent education?
Professor Chatterjee, you know, these are good ideas, but we need ideas at scale because the enormity of the problem, you know, that we're faced with. As of the latest data, between pre-primary to tertiary, 320 million children need to be educated in India. At least 50% of those 320 million children are going to government schools or will need to go to a government school, where we already know that there are challenges in terms of both infrastructure as well as learning and teaching. Now, you know, to the ideas that Shaheen and Urvashi Shani put on the table, as we reimagine the education system for the future, as we look at budgets, for instance, and let's be very, very clear, budgetary allocation to education, while it has seen an increase of a little over 10%, between 11 to 12% in the budget of 2022, we will require out-of-the-box thinking, even in terms of funding education. So I want to get started with you on where you are placed on this debate.
You have to look at fundamentally learning as the center piece. When that happens, then the artificial lines that we have drawn here in terms of institutions, schools, colleges, numbers, all of these will seem very different, because when the lines are blurred, you will see that the real classroom would be embedded inside the mind of the student. And in this case, the teacher can also be a student for a change. And if you see the emergence of technology, the kind of technology will be able to map specific learning requirements in a way that we never thought about. Immersive learning and deep insights and use of creative pedagogy will substitute linear and cognitive learning. So if you look at the scale of it, then you must admire the NAP's attempt, very bold attempt to make education more equitable, inclusive, and high quality, based on the pillars of accessibility, equity, quality, affordability, accountability. NEP aims to transform the very basis of what it means. Schools will gradually move towards a more flexible, multifaceted, multi-level, play-based, activity-based inquiry and domain-based learning. So if you look at what it means from the point of view of policy, national policy, it simply means that you have to contend with the world that did not exist in several hundred years.
I agree with what you say, that if we keep learning at the center of the debate and at the center of policy making, then perhaps we will be faced with a very different outcome that we are used to. But on the issue that you talked about, autonomy of classrooms, autonomy of institutions, individualized learning, great ideas. But Shaheen, what will it take for us to be able to get there? What are the pieces that need to be put in place to be able to achieve the vision that's just been drawn out? It's a beautiful vision, but how do we get to that?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing is embracing the vision itself, right? We have to believe that school is more than competition for marks for exams to get into a university, that is an important part and livelihood is an important part. But I also go to school to learn how to respect others, to be more open, to uplift others and the country and world around me. So I think that's the first point. I think the second is we need to really understand what we mean when we say blended learning. What is best done in a classroom? What can best be enabled by technology? And once we answer that question, we need to put in the thought and the hard work to retrain our teachers to embrace that blended form of learning. There is a massive opportunity, right? Suddenly, learning is not restricted to a classroom. It's not restricted to one teacher in front of you. Children can learn from anyone, anywhere in the world, at any time of the day or night. And that is beautiful, but that's a huge reorientation. And I think we must be cautious, thoughtful, and do it well. And then, of course, we must not shy away from investing the resources needed to actually make that happen. We can't be talking about a vision and having resources at a very different level.
Yeah, absolutely. There will need to be an alignment of resources as well as the objectives that we hope to achieve. We'll take a break here on India 2047, but when we return, we continue to discuss the blueprint for what India must do to ensure equitable education for all by 2047. Welcome back. You're watching India 2047, a landmark year as India completes 100 years of her independence. Through the course of the pandemic, while technology was a big enabler, we did, of course, see the digital divide also being highlighted very, very clearly for those who didn't have access to a smartphone. Even if they did have access to a smartphone, they didn't really know how to cope with what was going on. So this idea of blended learning, what will work best for the future, your thoughts on that, and more importantly, reimagining curriculum as well. In an era where you've got access to quantum computing, and all kinds of information available to you at the click of a button, how do we need to reimagine curriculum itself so that you leave mind space for children to focus on things that are actually going to be relevant from a future skills perspective?
I think it's important in terms of implementation to curate all of these and for policymakers to take these seriously, to have many, many discussions around them, to adapt and to implement. For this, we need political will. Shaheen said this earlier, that first you need to own the vision, and I want to repeat that. Who needs to own the vision? First of all is our policymakers and influencers and decision makers at all levels. They need to own the vision, and then they need to unleash a whole array of consultations, dialogues around the vision at every level, so that everybody learns to own the vision and sees that, yes, this is doable, this is possible. People have shown that it is possible. We have done it already. And it has worked. And also it is desirable. Not just that, it is inevitable, something that's coming. And so we need dialoguing, we need participation of everyone, and we need the policymakers and the governments to own the vision, to mean business, have a strong political will to make this happen. In terms of blended learning, I think blended learning can be understood in several ways, right? I know it's acquired a special meaning where you talk about technology and you talk about in-person learning. I'm also thinking of remote villages. I'm thinking of very poor communities where the devices and the technology simply does not exist and isn't going to exist for some time unless there's a huge push to make it exist. There, I think blended learning takes a different meaning, where you have schools, but you also have many people from the community who have lessons happening everywhere, and students have access to this, so that you blend formal learning with informal learning. And you try to reach technology even in a basic way as soon as you possibly can, so that resources can be shared from high resource urban centers to very poor rural communities. I think technology is here to stay. During the pandemic, we were all held hostage by it. We also learned to see many possibilities that did exist, but we hadn't seen them, we hadn't used them. And people became very, very creative. And using them more and more.
That gives me a great segue to bring Professor Chatterjee in. Professor Chatterjee, something you mentioned, and we're hearing that from Urvashi as well, that our classrooms need to ensure that we are teaching students how to be world citizens. And that links back with India's aspiration of being a global economic superpower. So how do you create a workforce, not just for India, but a global workforce equipped to deal with skills of the future and enhance India's competitive advantage, competitiveness as well?
We identify many variables that determine a situation. Unintended consequences of linear thinking is not going to solve the world's problems. So if you look at what India needs to do in order to remain competitive in the world, how can it take on the world? We have enough skills. The only question is, are the skills marketable? Are there finishing skills enough? Are there enough carpenters in this country that we can rate in a certain order? And so we need to have a whole view that just does not isolate skills as a standalone thing, but combine skills with the values that make somebody a global citizen. And these are very important attributes of skills. And I hope the policymakers will pay attention to this.
Urvashi Shani, to your point on curating a playbook of learned experiences, of best practices that have worked both in India as well as globally for India's education in 2047, the map for India's education system in 2047?
Yeah. So in fact, what a timely question. UNESCO has had, I think, thousands of consultations all over the world and come up with a report on the futures of education. Brookings has come up on one that is transforming education, and Catalyst 2030, that I'm a member of, has come up. We're coming up with one on pathways where we're doing exactly this, is curating solutions that social entrepreneurs have envisioned, created, implemented at scale, and forming a playbook that we want to offer to policymakers, saying that why don't you use these, adapt them, have them. And these are global. These are social entrepreneurs from all the continents, from the remotest parts. And we're trying to highlight these and offer them to governments and policymakers all over the world. We're hoping to launch it at the Transforming Education Summit coming up in September in New York at the UN General Assembly.
Well, we look forward to hearing more from you about that. Professor Chatterjee, curating a playbook for the future. Let me get the final word from you.
Well, I think we look at those Ds that we have looked at in IIM Kozhikode. I've looked at digitization, diversification and democratization of the education process. So I'm thinking, how do we scale up the IIM experiment? We've got liberals, MBA in liberal studies in management and MBA in finance. But how do we scale IIM into the IIM university? How do we actually look at IIM at a global scale? And so working back from that, if I can offer a simple solution, it will be the emergence of multidisciplinarity, and we will look at institutions as hubs rather than buildings, where we will be able to connect with other hubs of similar nature. So IIM as a unit can connect to Silicon Valley, and we can produce something that would be magnificent. So if we stop thinking of our educational spaces as buildings, as places, and think of them as spaces where hubs exist, and how do we connect those hubs in the right proportion across national boundaries, that would be the best response that India can give to the education challenge that we face going forward.
Well, that's a nice way to put it. Shaheen Mistry, your playbook.
Thanks. Three quick things. One, can we hold the highest bar possible for our children? And the highest bar is the full unleashing of a child's potential. We must look at a child and realize that it's not just about foundational literacy, numeracy, not just about getting a job, it's about their full potential. So high bar, can we hold that ourselves? Second, can we really listen to our children? It seems like such an obvious point, but we don't listen to our children. We don't talk to them and say, what do you want? How do you want to learn? And if we do that, everything will change in the system. And third, can we make the investment in leadership for the sector? Can we change who enters the sector? Can we invest in leadership at all levels of the system so that we're working with excellence and working together to really get not just an education, but an excellent education to every single child across the country?
Well, I think those are three very specific inputs that have come in from you, Shaheen, Urvashi, and Professor Chatterjee. Thanks very much. We hope that we've kick-started the dialogue here on what more needs to be done to ensure that we do have an education system that is not just about learning, but it's also about inculcating the values that we need, values like empathy, which often don't get spoken about when we talk about education, but those values are equally important. And we look forward to engaging with each one of you as we move towards the Indian education system for the future for 2047. Shaheen Mistry, Urvashi Shani, and Professor Chatterjee, many thanks for joining us here on this CNBC-TV18 special. Well, that's it then for this edition. We will see you again soon. From all of us here on the show, goodbye. Many thanks for watching.